Welcome everybody, and especially welcome Kristie Stein, who is here. Kristie, to give her presentation tonight. Kristie's from the Southern Sierra Research Council, station in Weldon, California. And you have such an interesting past. You have a bachelor in science from Louisiana State University and a master's from Ohio State. You've been all over. And then also, I'm interested in all your field work, Eastern United States, Peru, and Puerto Rico. Wonderful travels. Now you're doing some research about tricolor blackbirds in this area. So we want to thank you for being here and also welcome you and welcome everybody.
Thank you so much, Claire, for that introduction. And I just had a quick question. Is there a time scheduled for when the choir is singing? I just want to make sure that I'm not running into their time.
They are on YouTube, so we are wide open on that.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Perfect. Okay, so let me get my screen sharing. Okay, does that look okay?
I think it looks fine.
Okay,
yeah.
great.
Sorry, I muted myself.
Oh, no worries. I just wanted to make sure that the slides were showing up. Okay, great. Well, yes, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak at this meeting. It's really awesome to see all your faces and be able to connect with some fellow bird enthusiasts. So today, what we're going to be focusing on is MOTUS, which is this new idea and methodology to track the movements of wildlife. So this really includes all sorts of wildlife, birds, bats, insects, and beyond. So I'll start off by just giving a little bit of background into the Southern Sierra Research Station for those of you that aren't familiar with our research station. So we are a nonprofit research organization. We established in 2001, and our mission is really to conserve biological diversity through research. So to do this, we work with government, academic, and conservation organizations to gather data about species and populations, especially those that are of conservation concern, so that we can better inform environmental policy and also to increase appreciation of wildlife within the region. So just to give you a little context, I bet everyone on this call has been to the Kern River Valley, but we are east up the 178, just east of the Lake Isabella Reservoir. And then zooming in, you can see this is the location of our research station. So you just pass the reservoir a little bit and we are located on Fay Ranch Road. And if you haven't birded the area, I highly recommend it, especially during migration. It's a beautiful place. A lot of really intact riparian forest, both restored and older areas of growth. It's a great place to bird. So much of the research at SSRS has really focused on two species of conservation concern. First is the southwestern willow flycatcher. So I wanted to just give a little bit of background into some of what we've done with these two species. So for this species, we have field sites both in the Kern River Valley and in Central America. One thing we're really interested in is how does the influence of brown-headed cowbird parasitism affect reproductive success for this species? We've also done some work into locating specific wintering populations of this species. And then on the wintering grounds, identifying habitat conditions where the species thrives. And then considering the western yellow-billed cuckoo, We also have sites both in the Kern River Valley and on the lower Colorado River. And we also have done a little bit of work on their wintering grounds as well. We do a lot of species-specific surveys for them because they are a cryptic and difficult to detect species. And we've looked at, on their breeding grounds, habitat selection. So what are those kind of fine scale vegetative characteristics that they're looking for during breeding? And then working to kind of evaluate our own survey methodology. So how good are we really at even detecting yellow-billed cuckoos in the wild? And then just a little bit more about a few projects that we've been working on in recent years. For about the past 5 or 6 years, we have been running a MAPS bird banding station. So really this is to keep track of our local breeding birds and their demographic rates. So how are they surviving from year to year? And then in 2019, we started up a new project to look at tricolor blackbird movements. And in the past, we've also done some habitat restoration work specifically for this species in the Kern River Valley. Another project that we worked with the National Wildlife Federation on is really to look at the effects of wildfire on bird abundance in Los Padres National Forest. So we ran a series of point counts in riparian areas in an area that had been affected by the Zika fire, which happened in the early 2000s. And then we've also done some population monitoring in Anza Borrego Desert State Park, a beautiful place to visit as well. And we're really interested in the relationship between Least Bell's vireos, which is an endangered subspecies of Bell's vireo, in relation to the brown-headed cowbird population at the state park. So in 2019, this study came out that showed that we have actually 2.9 billion fewer birds than we had in 1970. And so in this study, the authors used citizen science data to evaluate population trajectories of all of our breeding bird species in the US and Canada. So we found this significant decline, and it actually occurred across our common species as well as some of our more uncommon species. And so we found that a number of things have really contributed to these bird declines, including habitat loss and degradation, cats and other invasive species, collisions with glass and other industrial infrastructure, and also pesticides and toxins can have a great effect on birds as they ingest these. So in the context of these large declines across bird species, it's really important to know where birds are and also how they're moving throughout their annual cycle. So that's really where this idea of studying movement ecology comes into play. So we know that actually 40% of all bird species are migratory, and even a larger number of species make these short distance movements away from their summer breeding habitat. So the overall goal of movement ecology is to quantitatively describe and understand how movement relates to both individual and population level processes for resource acquisition, so getting food and then surviving throughout the year. And I really like this quote that I found that says, "Movement is the glue that ties ecological processes together." So a few of the big questions that we can answer by studying movement ecology and also use to inform conservation management include where, and these may seem pretty basic, but we actually don't have these questions answered for many of our avian species. So where are individuals throughout the year? How do animals interact with their environment throughout the year? And then also, what is the rate of survival for a particular species? So in this graphic below, you can see the annual cycle of an American redstart. And so it's really integral to understanding the threats to the global population of American redstarts is really understanding where individuals are throughout the entire year. And so movement ecology really relies on two 21st century advances. The first is the tags or devices that are actually carried by the animals. And these are important, especially in areas that are really remote or otherwise challenging for biologists to work in. Having the tags on the animals really increases our ability to study individuals. And then secondly, there have been really large advances in the computational power used to manipulate, process, store, and also analyze big volumes of movement data at the individual level. So today, we currently have three types of tracking technology that biologists use. The first is radio telemetry, which is really what we'll be focusing on when we talk about MOTUS telemetry. So this is at the most basic type of transmitters, in that each transmitter emits a signal on a certain radio frequency. And as an observer, we can go out with a Yagi antenna and relocate that individual on the landscape. And so with these MOTUS stations, what we're doing is really automating that process of eliminating the biologist having to go out on the landscape and do that manual searching for individuals. Secondly, satellite telemetry, and third, GPS telemetry. So these second two types both use satellites that are orbiting the Earth to localize the position of the transmitter that's carried on the individual, but they actually have some great differences in the accuracy of locations, with GPS telemetry being the most accurate at anywhere down to 3 meters. So what is MOTUS? So MOTUS is the world's largest coordinated automated telemetry array. It's a collaborative international research network of telemetry stations, and it has a common or community infrastructure, meaning that researchers all across the globe contribute information to the MOTUS network. There's a centralized database, and the information is permanently archived on the MOTUS website. The MOTUS website also hosts public data and visualizations. And so this network is a program of Birds Canada in partnership with collaborating researchers and organizations. So the way this works is the MOTUS network runs on up to 3 frequencies. So it originally started with 1 frequency and now is capable of collecting information from 3 frequencies. And so this really allows more flexibility for researchers to be able to purchase transmitters from different telemetry companies. So prior to 2008, the 2 frequencies that we use were 166 and 150. And then more recently, we've added 434. So any animal carrying a device that emits one of these 3 frequencies can be detected by a MOTUS station. So this map is shows the current MOTUS stations. Each dot represents 1 station on the landscape. So as you can see, globally, there are over 900 of these stations transmitting currently. And actually at this point, since MOTUS started back in 2014, researchers have already tagged over 20,000 individuals of 230 different species of animals. And researchers have started 340 projects, which have already resulted in 114 publications. So the breadth of this research is really wide reaching, and it's growing quickly. So what components go into MOTUS technology? So the main thing is the receiver, or kind of like the computer of the system. So this is the component that, as individuals pass by these MOTUS stations and get detected by the antennas, the information is transmitted and stored on the actual receiver. Then we have the antennas. So these are the ones shown here are simple directional Yagi antennas, similar to what you would use to pick up, you know, a specific radio frequency at your home. So you can actually customize these stations to have the antennas oriented in any direction you'd like. And also the number of elements on each antenna kind of dictates the your detection range from that particular MOTUS station. And then the two other components are the transmitter, so the device that the animal carries, and then a new component to the system are nodes, which are basically like small versions of a receiver that you can deploy over the landscape in a systematic manner, so that you can get actually more fine scale localized data. And I'll explain that in a little more detail coming up. Okay, so here is a little animation showing how the process of individuals are detected at a MOTUS station. So we have our MOTUS station here in our pink circle. And then we have two directional antennas coming off of this station. And you can say that this cone of orange kind of represents the detection range from this particular station. So we have a couple birds flying by. And so really in this case, with this setup, what you're really getting is presence and absence, and also direction. So we know that individuals pass through this array, and we know the time that they did, and we also know the direction that they passed through this station. And so just going into a little bit about what that data might look like in a real-time scenario, or a real case scenario. So here we have a map of adult and juvenile Ipswich sparrows. These are their migratory routes. So each of these red circles represents a MOTUS station, and then you can see the black lines connecting stations. So these represent consecutive movements between stations for an individual. So we're really not getting information during their entire migratory route, but rather at these specific locations where MOTUS stations are placed over the landscape. So that's why you can see that dots are just connected by straight lines. So we really don't know exactly how these individuals moved from point A to point B, but we know they were here at time A and then time B. And then I mentioned those components called nodes. So here's a little bit about how they would work over the landscape. So in this situation, we have our receiver here in the lower right corner in pink, and then we have our node in orange here. So this circle represents the detection radius of a particular node. And we would want to set up a grid of nodes over a landscape of a particular maybe habitat that we expect a species to be using during a certain time of the year. And so what you get is really these overlapping detection radiuses. So as birds are coming through this node array, you can see that this bird here on the left was detected by these 4 nodes. And so because they're detected by multiple nodes at a time, you can actually get localized information. So we know that the bird was at this exact point at a certain time. So the same thing with these other individuals. So this is really, and as the birds relocate within that node array, they'll be redetected. So this is actually the newest type of technology that has been integrated into the system and really could be a game changer in eliminating the need for us to go out on the landscape and really, you know, take the time to locate individuals by hand, which can be very difficult and also time consuming. So I showed a little bit about what the data would look like from just a station with directional antennas. So if you were to have a node grid over the landscape, this is an example of what the data might look like. So here we have a yellow-rumped warbler, and you can see that it's carrying a little tag that actually has a solar panel on it. And I'll play this animation, and while you're watching it, really what you're seeing is the daily life of a yellow-rumped warbler. So you'll notice that the colors change within this bubble of movement, and there's always a little bit of error associated with these locations. So the likelihood that the real location where the individual would be is higher the darker the colors you get. So as this bird moves throughout the day, you can see the exact habitat on the landscape that it's using. So maybe you want to answer a specific question about the stopover ecology of yellow-rumped warbler. So by doing this, you could hone in on specific aspects of the landscape that the bird is using during certain times of the year. Okay, so next I thought it would be nice to kind of get everyone familiarized with the MOTUS website and what it has to offer. So I will switch gears for my presentation and take you all to the website. So let's see. Okay, can you all see the website, or are you still seeing my slides?
We're still seeing the slides. I think you may need to change your sharing to share the web browser.
Okay, let's see.
Go to screen share maybe.
Okay, does anyone know how I can get the screen share option to pop back up? I'm just seeing the view, the gallery view right now.
The green screen share at the bottom button. At the very bottom of your screen, is there a green like rectangle with an arrow?
No, I'm just seeing the view where it shows all of the participants, but it doesn't show any other options. Let's see how I can do this.
I can stop your screen sharing and maybe you can start it again.
Yeah, I think that may be the case, that you might need to stop it and then the button will pop back up for me. We can try that.
See if I need to actually do the share or if it's enough for me to interrupt it. Let's see here. Did that interrupt it? No, it didn't. Okay, I'll actually share it here. Click the button that says share computer sound because that's important. And let's pick some. Share. Okay, grab it back now.
Okay, great. That works perfectly.
Let me stop
Wait.
share.
Okay.
Now I stopped share. Okay, now you can grab it.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Okay, how's that look? Are you seeing something that says MOTUS wildlife tracking? Okay, great.
Sunset.
So this is the home page of the, okay. So yeah, this is the homepage of the MOTUS website. It's just motus.org. And if you scroll down, this is that map that I showed a little earlier of all the receiver locations. So this is kind of nice. There's a little slider here. Let's see, it might take a second to load. Okay, there we go. So you can actually zoom into a particular location. So we can zoom into our stations on the kern. So right now we have 2 stations that are active. If you click on our little bubble, it tells you a little bit about the particular study, who the project contact is, how many antennas there are, and the location. And you can do that for any of these yellow dots, which is pretty nice if you're just curious to see what's going on in a particular area. And then another kind of fun thing that you can do is you can use this slider to see how the MOTUS stations appeared on the landscape over time. So you can see these Western stations really only came online within the last year, which is something I'll talk about a little bit more coming up in the talk. So let's go back to the home page. So here we have some options for exploring the website. Just a little bit in general about MOTUS, how you can get involved. And I wanted to kind of highlight this education portion of the website. So there's a short little 2-minute video on MOTUS here. We won't watch that. But I just wanted to show that MOTUS actually does have educational resources that are specifically geared towards a curriculum across grades 7 to 12. So if this is something that is of interest to you, it might be a great opportunity to incorporate migration education into a school curriculum. And they even have individualized student activities that can be added to a science class as well. So just wanted to point that out in case anyone might be interested. And going back to the homepage, another thing that is really fun to play around on is this Explore Data tab. So under Explore Data, you can go down to View Tracks. And then through this page, you can actually see movement maps for all of the species that have been tagged thus far through the MOTUS network. So I thought it would be nice to show you guys a couple of example maps of what type of information you can get from MOTUS. So I clicked on a animation that is a data set of 8 silver-haired bats, 10 eastern red bats, and 3 hoary bats. And then we'll just hit play. So all of these birds are being captured here at Long Point Bird Observatory. And then you can see their movements over time. And you can see here the animation started on August 16, 2015 and finished on October 2015. So this is a fairly short time period of tracking. You can see, like I was showing before, these locations show detections at consecutive MODIS stations. So each one of these circles represents an individual MODIS station. And so the movements in Ontario are fairly varied but are not that wide ranging, but we can compare that to something like, let's look at some Catharus thrushes. Okay, so here we have 22 Bicknell's thrushes, 24 Swainson's thrushes, and 8 gray cheek thrushes. And this animation runs from August 2015 to October 2015. So we have our birds being deployed here and here. And then one thing I just want to note that is of interest here is you can see actually some really interesting variation in departure timing, as well as the speed of movements between individual locations. So you saw some individuals move very slowly from point to point, and other individuals maybe migrated from their capture point to the coast of Connecticut here overnight. So one thing that you can really use MODIS for is to get really fine scale temporal data of movements over time. And so going back to the website, you can, so these demonstration maps that I just showed are some of the research that has been done by Birds Canada. So the organization that is responsible for coordinating MODIS, but you can actually search by species and it will show you animations for all of the species that have movement data located on the MODIS website. So it's pretty fun to poke around on if you have some extra time. So that's really all I wanted to show you on the website. So I'll go back to the presentation. So let's see.
Let me know if you need me to stop you.
Okay, yes, I think we'll have to stop and start sharing one more time.
Okay, there I stopped. Now you can start.
Thank you.
There's probably a better way to do this, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure either because the option doesn't pop up until it's stopped, I think.
At the top of my screen, I see you are reviewing Kristie Stein's screen, and next to it, it has a view option.
Okay. Maybe that's how to do it. Yeah, I'm not that familiar with Zoom. At work, we use Microsoft Teams and the format is a little different. Okay. So are my slides showing again? Does that look okay?
Looks like the website.
Website, okay.
That's your slide.
Did you have a slide?
It's a slide,
website?
okay.
Slide.
Great.
Sorry.
Okay, here we go. So I wanted to also include a short case study on insects since I've really been focusing on birds this whole time. So in 2019, this paper came out looking at the influence of how wind and temperature influence the pace of insect migration for 2 species. So this study focused on the monarch and the green darner. And the authors were interested in answering 2 questions. The first is, at what rate are monarchs and green darners moving during migration? And then secondly, how do environmental variables, including wind, temperature, and precipitation, affect the pace of migration? And so here we can see some sequential detections of radio tagged monarchs, which are indicated by orange lines, as well as the green darners indicated by the green lines. And so what we found here is that monarchs traveled up to 143 kilometers in one day, which seems like a crazy feat for such a small animal. And green darners actually traveled up to 122 kilometers in one day. And they found that for both species, increased temperatures and wind assistance positively influenced migration pace. And so this study is really at the beginning of what we know about insect migration, because this is the first time that we've been able to put transmitters on animals that are this small. So there are many, many more questions that will be investigated in the future using this movement technology with insects. Okay, so going back to this map of MOTUS stations within North America, like I said, you'll notice that the density of stations within the West is quite different than what we have in Eastern North America. And so because of this, Partners in Flight, which is a national organization devoted to the conservation of land birds, and their mission is really keeping common birds common, they started this initiative to really expand MOTUS stations throughout the West, because really in general, a lot of the movement and migration research on land birds has been focused in the East overall. So really what we know about a lot of our Western migrants is lacking. So this initiative aims to stimulate migration research in the West, provide better information to assess threats for migratory birds, identify important migratory stopover sites, and then also finally increase public interest in migratory wildlife. So another potential bonus is that if we can get zoos and schools and other educational entities involved, we can really increase the public knowledge and interest in conserving migratory animals. So in 2018, this is what the MOTUS map looked like. And you can see there's really no stations across the West except for a few here in Canada. And I think this one came online in 2018. And then in 2019, you can see a few more stations popping up. Our stations in Southern California, as well as a couple of stations in Montana. And for 2022, this is what we're shooting for. So we want to have coverage that is more similar to what's happening in the East. And we use these locations to cover a suite of species. So species utilizing different habitats such as grassland birds, riparian species, shorebird species. So that's kind of our strategy moving forward. And the initiative is really gaining speed, and I think we can expect to have a good number of these stations on the landscape by 2022. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, I want to focus on the research that we've done so far on tricolored blackbirds in the Kern River Valley. So we have three main objectives for this research. The first is to determine tricolored blackbird seasonal movement patterns in the Kern River Valley. We also want to measure and describe tricolored blackbird post-breeding habitats, as well as adding to this collaborative network to enhance research on migration ecology. So our methods, so far in the Kern River Valley, we deployed 2 MOTUS stations to support this work. We captured over 30 adults with mist nets at a roosting location. And these captures were in 2019 in August. So these were post-breeding captures. and we deployed 26 nanotags. And this was on a mix of male and female birds, all adult birds. And we tracked birds for 4 months post-capture. And we basically tracked individuals until they departed from the Kern River Valley. So what do we find? Here in this map, you can see our red triangle is one of our Motus towers. I don't actually have the other tower on the map, but it is below where the white dots are. That's where our second station is. And then our capture site is located by this blue circle. And then all of these white dots are locations where individuals were relocated post-capture. So we tracked individuals anywhere from 2 to 78 days post-capture. And we found that foraging locations were typically close to the roosting site within 3 kilometers. And later in the season, birds were detected foraging anywhere from 6 to 15 kilometers away before departing the Kern River Valley completely. So one interesting finding from our preliminary work is that the breeding population of tricolored blackbirds within the Kern River Valley actually are migratory. There have been reports of individuals wintering at Canebrake Ecological Reserve over the years, but it seems that those individuals are not actually the birds that breed in the Kern River Valley. So they're moving into the valley after the breeding season. And during this post-breeding season from August to November, we found that birds are mainly foraging in agricultural areas and also residential areas at bird feeders. So some of the Kern Audubon Society members generously donated funds to SSRS. So thank you so much for supporting this research. But however, due to COVID limiting our ability to conduct field work this year, we haven't yet used the funds to continue our movement work. But we do have plans to use the money to purchase transmitters to continue studying this species for the 2021 breeding season. So for this next round of research, we hope to capture birds actually before the breeding season to track their movements between breeding attempts. So we know that this is a species that can breed multiple times within a season. So one thing that we're interested in is how do breeding habitats change over time? We see some relationship between the types of habitats that the birds nest in early in the season versus late in the season. And we think that there may be differences in reproductive success between habitat types in the Kern River Valley. So we want to use that as a motivating question moving forward. And then another project that we have in the works for Motus research at SSRS is collaborating with a PhD student at Washington State University. And he's really interested in looking at stopover ecology of Western migrants for a suite of species, one including the Western tanager. And he will probably choose the rest of the species as we get a little bit more information. So one thing we're going to look at is to determine stopover length and habitat use of Western migrants in both restored and non-restored riparian habitats. So the Kern River Valley is a really nice place to look at this for Western migrants because we have some areas on the Audubon Preserve that are restored and some areas that are non-restored. So we can really see use this movement data to look at on the landscape, how are birds refueling during stopover. So how can you get involved? So the first way is to provide funding for station establishment and maintenance. And this is something that, this group is already contributing to through providing funding for transmitters to continue our research. So again, huge thank you for that. You can also install a station at your site, which would contribute to the overall network. And then also promoting the educational resources to be incorporated into school programs. Like I said, just getting the word out there about migration research and migratory birds in general is always a good thing. And then outside of that, I just wanted to highlight a few additional things that aren't directly related to MOTUS or movement research, but are actually really simple actions that everyone can do to help birds in their daily life. And these are some suggestions that came out of that paper from 2019 that showed that significant bird decline of 3 billion birds since 1970. So it's really important that we as scientists and citizen scientists and bird enthusiasts just really do our part in reducing these threats to bird populations. So first, by day, birds perceive reflections in glass as habitat that they can fly into. And then also by night, migratory birds can be drawn into city lights and can be at a higher risk of colliding with buildings. So you can make windows safer by installing screens or breaking up reflections by using stickers, paints, or strings spaced no more than 2 inches apart. And you'll notice that this will really decrease your bird collisions at your house or particular building. And then secondly, we all know that cats can make great pets, but actually more than 110 million feral and pet cats roam freely in the US and Canada. And we know that these non-native predators instinctively hunt and kill birds even when they're well fed. So you can save birds and keep your cats healthy by keeping them indoors or creating an outdoor catio. And another thing that you can do, we have a cat at SSRS that we've trained to walk on a leash, and he loves it, and it gets him his outdoor time as well. And then thirdly, lawns and pavements don't offer much food or shelter for many birds and other wildlife. And so there's just a lot of potential to add native plants, and you'll see birds come in. Native plants add beauty and interest to your yard and provide shelter and food for birds. The nectar, seeds, and berries will sustain birds and diverse wildlife in your yards. And then avoiding pesticide use on your property. So pesticides that are toxic to birds can harm them directly through contact or if they eat contaminated seeds or prey. Pesticides can also indirectly harm birds by reducing the number of insects that birds need to survive. So consider purchasing organic food. Nearly 70% of the produce sold in the US contains pesticides. And also you can try reducing pesticide use around your home and garden. So the next one is about drinking shade-grown coffee. So a large proportion of the world's coffee farms grow their plants in the sun, which actually they destroy native forests and other habitat that birds use during the wintering season. So shade-grown coffee preserves the forest canopy in tropical areas, and it actually helps migratory birds survive the winter. So it's a win-win situation. It's delicious, it's economically beneficial to those farmers that work in those areas, and it actually helps over 42 species of neotropical migrants on the wintering grounds that use coffee plantations. And then another way you can do this is to use less single-use plastics. So we know that plastic takes more than 400 years to degrade. And actually, the large majority of plastics that we use are not recycled. So avoiding things like plastic bags, bottles, wraps, and disposable utensils. If you can, using reusable items is great. But if you do have to use plastic, please recycle it. And then finally, this is something that I'm really passionate about is, to understand how birds are faring, we really need hundreds of thousands of people to report what they're seeing all across different types of habitats. So in backyards, neighborhoods, and also natural places around the world. So without this information, we can easily be missing important threats to species. So joining a project such as eBird, Project Feeder Watch, you can do a Christmas bird count or a breeding bird survey. All of these options are great, and your contributions really provide valuable information that scientists use every day to conserve species of birds across North America. So I think that's all I have. I'll go back to my slide here. So thank you so much for having me. I have a couple links here to the MOTUS website to research on our webpage, the MOTUS Initiative, the Western MOTUS Initiative, and then my email here. So I'm happy to take any questions that you guys have. I hope it was informative. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristie. People you can use the chat button at the bottom of your screen, or if you just want to turn your video on and then raise your hand, you can be recognized. Does anybody have any question of Kristie?
Kristie?
Yeah.
I would love to know how small the things are that they're putting on the butterfly, like the tracker on how small is that? Rice small?
Yeah. So they are very, very tiny. I don't know the exact weight, but it would have to be, 0.001 grams or something, like minuscule weights. And so one thing that we know for birds is that birds can pretty safely carry a transmitter that is up to about 3% of their body weight. But for insects, I did read in that study that the transmitters actually were about 50% of their body weight. So we know that in that case, we don't know yet how those transmitters affected the insect's movement. But it is something that, we're working on to get these transmitters smaller and smaller so that we can track individuals over longer periods of time. But just the fact that we can track insects at all, I think is pretty amazing.
Thank you, Kristie. Anyone else have a question of Kristie? Well, Claire, would you please talk about next month's